Hi guys, welcome back to Elephants in the Room. I am here with Karissa Wampler, one of my good friends that I actually met on TikTok. So fun. We actually just filmed like a whole intro and then I realized that my memory card I think was full, so I fixed it. So now we're restarting round two. Anyway, she is a content creator and she does all the things, has a psychology degree. What would you say is like your favorite parts or like what you are really leaning into on social media right now? Like what would you classify yourself as at the current moment?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. Love Elephants in the Room. Big fan.
Thank you.
But I would say on social media, I'm kind of just like a nicheless content creator.
Love it.
I love to do a lot of travel style content. I do some psychology and self-development, like mental health content occasionally. That's kind of what I started on. I did a lot of like life advice. It was so funny because I'm like 20 years old at the time and I thought I knew everything. So that's kind of where I got my start. But now I really just post like me. It's just whatever I'm doing, whatever adventures I'm on. But I'm trying to lean into more of like the travel influencer type of thing because I really like that space. And I went on a van trip recently and it just changed my whole life. I just realized I love seeing the world. So I'm actually buying a van.
I was gonna say, can I tell them? Yesterday she was like, I'm getting a van. I was like, no way. That's so cool.
So the plan now is I think I'm gonna go home from this trip. When I get back, I'm gonna go look at vans and then I'm gonna invest in like a good video and photo camera.
Love it.
Lean a little bit more into the photography and the nature side of things. And then I think it'll be a mix of like that, just like my lifestyle, like nature things, and then some self-development, mental health stuff. And actually I would love to get more into like my God content because I talk about God openly like on my stories, though my faith is such an important part of my life and I want to lean into that. But it's scary too. Yeah. But that is in the cards in the future. I'm getting there.
Yeah. It's tricky to navigate for sure. I feel like there's a right way to do it, but it is hard to figure it out. So it's good that you're like, you know, you're aware, you're like, okay, I want to do this. So you're being intentional, which is good.
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Well, so she does it all, guys, as you can tell. Today's subject, what we're going to be talking about, you guys know how I am and why I started this podcast. And it was because I wanted to create a space where, you know, we can shine light on dark places that aren't talked about. And Karissa sadly shares a traumatic event with me, a similar traumatic event, which is divorce, young divorce. So we're going to talk about that, breakups, divorce in your early 20s, young marriage, all the things, the healing process, the traumatizing parts of it, and just how it feels like when you go through it. Yeah, it just feels like such a unique experience and like you can't relate to people. You feel like I feel like it just, isolated. You feel like you're just in a different world. Like when things start happening and then, you know, post-divorce, like even when you start dating, like it bleeds into so much of your life. And so we're going to talk about all of that today. So we're really excited. We are in Alabama, which is so random. We're here for a festival. It's, what was it called? Hangout Fest?
The Hangout Fest.
The Hangout Fest. Yes. So we went yesterday and David performed yesterday. And Karissa and some of her friends came out. So we got to meet in real life because we've been internet friends for like 2 years.
Yeah, for a while. We talk all the time, but we've never actually met.
But I feel like when I met you, I was like, I feel like I've already met you.
Yeah, exactly.
But we like FaceTime. So I feel like that like FaceTime makes you feel like you've met someone a little bit. So
as long as you're like talking and having a conversation. But even then, like I have so many, like the majority of my good friends are people that I've never met, which is so funny. But I feel like that's just part of being a content creator.
Oh yeah.
It's so normal.
Well, and also I feel like that's what's cool. One cool thing about social media is like you do have access to so many people, and so it's like you get to find people that you really like connect to.
You find your people.
Yeah, it's not just like convenient friends like that you just see in your hometown and you're like, oh, like we're just gonna be friends because you're here, you know. It's like you kind of get to pick and choose the people that you like actually connect to.
And it's so special too because like we were talking about before we started the podcast, there's social media is so nice for that. And when you go through something traumatic like divorce, when you do have a social media platform, I would have never found you without that. But it's so nice because you can find people like Nicole who have such a similar story. Which we would have never met otherwise. Right. But it's like there's so few people that I feel like I know in my area that can really like connect to that and relate to it. But social media is great for that.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. I feel like even to this day, there's not a lot of people. I mean, I'm trying to even list people on my hand that I know that have been through a young
age.
divorce at our age. Yeah. And I'm like, I actually don't even know if I really know that. I'm like, wait, I can't even think of that many
one
people.
of the only ones.
I know. I'm like, gosh. But I know there's people out there. I know there's people watching this right now who have experienced a divorce. And even if it wasn't a young divorce, even if you're older and you got a divorce in the middle of your life or whatever it is, I mean, no matter when you get a divorce, it's traumatic. Absolutely. And it's a really unique experience. So yeah, I want to dive into all that stuff. But first, I want Karissa, tell us a little bit about like your childhood. Just give a little background on that so we know you a little better before we dive into all your trauma.
Well, before we get into the trauma dumping. But my name's Karissa Wampler. I live in Sarasota, Florida. I'm definitely a Florida beach girl. I was born there, raised in Bradenton. I lived there for about 10 years, and then I moved to a small farm town, Martinsville, Indiana. My grandpa was sick, so my family moved up there to take over the farm, and I had about 9-10 years of being a farm girl, like driving tractors, learning all the back end of the farming and everything. So you wouldn't know that by looking at me, but I definitely have a lot of farm girl in me. And then I moved back to like Sarasota, Bradenton area when I was 18 or 19. And I stayed there through college. I went to Southeastern University. It's a small Christian university. I feel like a lot of people haven't really heard of it, but I went to an extension site in my city. So that was great. I got to study psychology. I met so many amazing people. And I don't know, I feel like I lost myself when I moved to Indiana a little bit. And like I just kind of got in with the wrong friends, and then things had kind of gotten really bad, little other traumatic event.
The trauma.
A different traumatic relationship. Yeah. But so I ended up leaving Martinsville and I moved to Sarasota, Bradenton area. And I kind of just like completely started my life over. And I just made a list of all the things I wanted to change about myself. And then shortly after that, when I was in college, I got into social media, and I had been on this whole self-development journey. And that's kind of how everything started, because I had just seen so much change in my personal life. And I was like, I want to share these like hacks and tips and tricks with all these other people my age that are just like struggling from that jump to being with your parents, being a child, to like moving out on your own and just becoming your own person and working in the corporate world or in a restaurant or whatever that looks like for them. It's just, that's such a hard age to be. And I just felt like I had learned so much in that span of 2 or 3 years, and I just wanted to share that. So that's kind of how I got into social media.
That's awesome.
And then I got married and divorced, and now I'm
yes. Okay, so let's tap more into all of that. Thank you for telling us a little bit about that. I can see you baling some hay. I'm like thinking about it. I'm like, I can see it. So tell us a little bit about, when you got married and what that looked like. How old were you? Tell us a little bit of that.
Yeah. So when I was 18, a few days before I graduated high school, I met my ex-husband. We met at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He was a race car driver at the time, and I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world, because I was from a little small farm town. Everybody loved racing. So we met, just kind of fell in love. We were both really young, and we got married. Well, he lived in Florida, and so I was moving to Florida anyway. So it just kind of worked out at the time. So we ended up just falling in love, getting married. And of course, we were both young. There's a lot of questions that should have been asked beforehand that weren't. And then we found ourselves married. I was married from the time I was 21 to 23, I think.
Got it.
And we got married in 2021 in the beginning of the year. And then we were married. Basically, we ended up separating at the end of 2022. So we were fully married for, actually, maybe I'm getting the timelines wrong.
No, I
honestly, I don't even remember.
If people were to trace back and go to all the podcast episodes, they'd be like, wait, she said 2 years here. She said, like, it's so confusing to like, really when is. You think, I think because of the trauma, well, it's just a lot. It's hard. Well, it's very hazy. And I feel like there's such a process with divorce of like, you get married and then things kind of start to go bad.
Separation.
Then there's a separation. Then there's usually like a you rekindle, and then there's a back and forth.
Exactly.
And then
it's not
like,
black and white.
Yeah, and then it leads to the end. And then you have to like actually legally get divorced. So there's like a filing paper process.
Exactly.
So like the timeline is a lot.
But like, long story short, we were married for 2 years, and then we were separated for quite a while, but like no contact. And then we ended up getting divorced. So it was a whole process. It took a while, but yeah, we ended up getting divorced. It was very traumatic, and we can definitely get more into that later too. But since then, it's been, I think, like a year and a half.
Okay.
Like just over a year and a half, coming up on 2 years. But it has been a process.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a long healing process. There's so much behind the scenes that I think people don't see, especially when you're on social media and you're a very public person. We were both pretty public people during the marriage. And so like there were a lot of questions that people had that I think didn't get answered. And it was just a lot of pressure and that added to everything. And so it was definitely a rough process, but God got me through, you know.
Praise the Lord. We make it through
Exactly.
somehow, some way.
Yeah, exactly. And I had so many amazing people in my life that really stepped up. And at the same time, a lot of people didn't step up. And there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. And I'm excited to talk about it.
Yes.
I mean, it's a scary and hard process, but it's also so beautiful. And so much good has come from it. And I feel like I've changed for the better. And I found God in a different way. And so it's been a beautiful process, definitely tricky, but so much good has come from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I think everything you're saying is so true. And it's such a unique experience because like, obviously when you're going through it, you're like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Like, I'm never going to be okay. But then like kind of post hindsight, you know, now you've kind of been out of it. And I feel like right around that same time as you is when I was like, okay, like, I never thought I would say that I'm glad that this happened, but like, I'm glad that this happened.
Oh, 100%.
You know what I mean? Right. But when you're in it, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is terrible. So it's such a weird experience because it's like so terrible. And there's so much death, like grieving that happens in it, grieving of relationships, grieving of parts of yourself, grieving of their family, like so many dynamics. And so there's a lot of grieving, but I feel like because of that, it allows a ton of space for growth and a ton of space for kind of just like re-identifying yourself and who you are and finding just that self-love and like independence that maybe wasn't there as much, you know? And so I feel like that's so powerful and good, but it's a lot and it's so complicated. So I like that you said like, yeah, it's been a process, it's been like a journey. Like you can't sum it up in one word because it's been like a lot of different emotions, some good, like some bad, you know? So yeah, I'm glad you said that, but I guess kind of take us back. I feel like obviously when things kind of start to go wrong in a marriage is kind of the beginning of that process. So when you start, you know, when did you start to be like, okay, this may not work out, you know, and you don't have to tell the details of what happened, but what was that feeling like for you? Because obviously you were like, I'm going to be with this person forever. I'm going to build my life with this person. You know, what was that transition like for you mentally?
Right. I mean, so like you said, it's a process. And the other thing you said before is like in hindsight, everything is so much different. And when you're not in the emotional state and like in the trauma state as much, you kind of see things differently. And looking back, I realized that after I got married, I think my body knew things that weren't right before my mind did. And that's the interesting thing about trauma is that like your body picks up on things that your brain can't.
Oh yeah.
And so even though consciously I didn't realize that something was wrong, my body, like my anxiety has just never been that bad. And to the point where I was just like in the hospital for panic attacks. And I was just suffering like so strongly with all this. And I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And my body was just trying to tell me, it's like, hey, like these are red flags, like something's wrong, you know? Like this isn't good and this is not a good relationship. And like, I didn't realize it. But I know you said I don't have to get too much into it. At one point I did find out that he was unfaithful. But it wasn't until that point that I had like seen these red flags and things that were going on. I think God knew I needed a slap in the face to wake up. And it was at that point, like I kind of started to seek out and get help from people around me and talk to different counselors and people who were smarter than me that had been married for a long time. And I'm like, okay, you know, how do we fix this? How do we get ahead of this? And it was a long process. I don't remember exactly what your question was because I got off on a tangent.
No, I know it's so hard because it's so like I feel the same way. And anytime someone asks me a question, it's like there's so many layers. So yeah, what you answered was great. Is kind of like what led you and what that first initial feeling was, which was, you know, you kind of shared when you first got married, like in your mind things were good, right? You know, like in the dating process, I'm sure everything was great as it is, stage, right? Honeymoon stage. And then you get married, which how long did you guys date for, by the way?
We dated for
before you got married?
A year and a half, 2 years. Yeah.
It's so funny because I feel like when we're young, we think that's so long.
Right.
And like, but now I'm like, it's not enough time.
Yeah. No.
I mean, in every situation, so unique. I always tell people, I'm like, because people are like, oh, you just got divorced because you were young. I'm like, okay, you can have a successful marriage even if you get married young. Like that's not why people get divorced. But yeah, I would say like generally, obviously we change so much when we're young and whatever. But yeah, so like you guys dated for a year and a half and then got married. Things were good. Right. But your body was there were things that were probably going on that your mind was like, no, that's fine. It's normal. Right.
Well, yeah. And I think like saying things are good is kind of relative for me because my thing is I grew up in such a strict like Christian home, which I love my parents. They're amazing. But it's something that I've talked with them about is the fact that I wasn't allowed to date. And so it's like, do you ever see those jokes? It's like, you're not allowed to date till you're married. It was kind of like that, you know? And my parents were very against us dating, and they would give us books about dating and things to read. But because we were so focused on just like, you know, don't date, don't have sex, don't do any of these things, I never really had relationships up to the point where I was like 17, and maybe I had like talked to boys, but because like my parents, like they were to the extent they're like, if a boy is interested in dating with you, he needs to come in a room alone with us, and we're going to interview him without you. And boys were scared to date me, which in a sense is good. But I never really had experience with dating and relationships, and that's where for me like being young kind of played a factor. Is I think I wasn't ready to get married because I didn't know what was out there. I didn't know enough about myself, but at the time I thought I knew everything. You know? And so things were good until I realized they weren't. And I realized that we both had a lot more to learn, and that we both had a lot of growth that needed to happen, which eventually led to the downfall of everything. But yeah, in the beginning, things are good. And then to answer your question, I started to realize things were wrong slowly. But until all of the information finally came out and I realized what was going on, like there were little things, and it was mostly just the anxiety for me. It was just like a constant anxiety and like the walking on eggshells and just like not feeling, you know, what I needed to feel in a relationship. Totally. But it's a slow process, and sometimes we need the slap in the face to wake us up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So kind of looking back, hindsight for you, when you look at when you got married, do you think there was maybe like a excitement, or do you think part of like the way that your parents raised you with dating kind of pushed you into like when you did find someone that you liked or loved, you're like, oh, like I'm ready to do this, because you felt like you kind of got held back from that? Like did it kind of feel like, oh well, now I found someone I love, like I'm just gonna marry them? And do you even think that maybe some of those Christian perspectives on purity, or not perspectives, but the purity, culture, all that stuff, do you think that kind of also pushed? Oh, I think our coffee's here. Oh, yay. Okay guys, we got our coffee. We're good. We're happy now. Mine is like so white. I'm like, why did they add so much milk to mine? I think this one is like, it's milk mixed with half and half.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's pretty though.
It tastes good. I don't know how good it is for me, but it's great. Our Uber Eats order literally took like 2 hours to get here, but it's fine.
But it got here.
It got here. Okay, back to what we were talking about. So do you think that kind of the way you were raised in a really strict Christian household, do you feel like that played a factor into you getting married when you did, and also kind of your parents' pressure around not dating? Do you think that played into it?
Absolutely. I mean, I love my parents. I adore them. They're great, and they had the best of intentions. So this is obviously not a jab to them. Totally. Because they love us, and, you know, they just wanted to protect us, especially the girls too, and protect our hearts as well, because they've also been through a lot.
100%.
And of course, parents, their intentions are always to like protect you from getting heartbroken, but they don't always go about it the right way, you know? And with the Christian purity culture, a lot of people just tell you like, don't date, you know, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, but they don't tell you what to do. And the other thing is like a lot of people, and I think things are evolving now to where people are openly talking about things more, and how to go about dating and relationships. And I think the conversations are becoming more open. But when we were growing up, because we're around the same age, and I don't know if it was like this because I'm not Mormon, you know, I grew up in the Christian church, it's a little different, but with the purity culture, it was very much just like, no, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, and if you do everything right, you're gonna find somebody, and then
and it's gonna work out for you.
It's gonna work out perfectly. Just don't touch them, and it's gonna, everything's gonna work out for you, and it'll be perfect, you know. But like they didn't really tell you about the red flags and things not to look or to look for and what not to do. And it just, it was very confusing for me, and I kind of was under this impression that it was just going to be this fairy tale, and I was going to meet the right person, and you're just going to know, and then you're going to live happily ever after. Yep. And I wasn't really prepared for that, and not dating absolutely played into that. Whereas like now, you know, I've had to force myself to date a little bit because I realize, you know, there's things that I don't know, and there's things that I want to look for. And if I were to find like a long-term partner that I wanted to marry again, you know, I want to have that experience and like meeting people and those conversations under my belt, things that I should have done when I was, you know, coming out of high school or in college. And I think it absolutely plays a factor. And there's so much that you learn from dating, and it can be done in the right way too, to where it's healthy and not just attaching your heart to so many different people.
Totally.
Because there's a lot of harm that can come from that too.
Yeah.
But yes, to answer your question, yes, that absolutely affected how I viewed dating and my experience in getting married quickly.
Totally. Too. Yeah, that's unfortunately I feel like the common experience. And I think it's so good what you're saying, because it's I think just generally, and I think you can agree to this, like that's such an issue. And I think the generation is so different. Like I think this generation before us was like, just put your head down and do it. Like, don't talk about it. Brush stuff under the rug. Like, it's just very like, this is just how it goes. But it's like, it's so empowering and impactful to talk about things, because it's like, like I'm all for purity. I'm like, preach that, tell that, like that's good. Cause I think there's so much damage that comes from, you know, like it's such an emotional thing for women. It's really hard. I mean, obviously for both, but I know for women that it's like, your like body literally releases like hormones or something for 3 months after you have with someone, because you're like supposed to be attached to them. It's supposed to be your husband, you know? So it's like, I'm all for that. But I think like, it's so sad that like, we don't talk about, hey, like these are things that can happen. Here's red flags. Here's this. Here's how to date. It's like, just don't. It's like, no, like we need to know as kids, like we need to be able to explore, at least knowing, not necessarily like it actually explore, but it's like maybe if we knew more and we had more information, we wouldn't feel like we had to go and like explore everything ourselves. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like it's just like, just don't talk about it. Just don't. It's like, I'm literally going to sit my kids down and be like, this is why you shouldn't do drugs. You want to see? Like, I'm going to tell you why. Like, I'm not going to tell you, don't go do drugs. Just don't do them. They're bad.
The
like,
why is so important.
No, I'm going to tell you like, let's actually get into what can happen, you know, and like, try to provide a safe space for your kid to feel like, even if they do mess up, that you're there, you know, and that they're not any less. But like, and sometimes we have to do stuff to learn lessons, you know. But all of that to say, like, I do think that in the Mormonism sense, kind of relating to, I think it's just, you kind of do what you're told, right? It's like, okay, like you find someone that you love and then you just get married. Don't have sex before you get married, and just get married. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's like, that's kind of what is portrayed as just kind of this perfect little timeline of, okay, graduate high school, go to college, get married, have a family. That's just kind of what is supposed to happen. And so in your head, you're like, okay, like I'm just going to do that.
Well, and the hard part is it becomes an idol, the view of marriage and having the marriage
so much.
And it's just, we sometimes as kids, when you're brought up to believe all these things about marriage and you just believe it's going to be a fairy tale, having a marriage and being married, it becomes this idol in your life, and you just idolize married couples, you know. And if you don't have that, you feel like you're not worthy, or you feel like you're not good enough, or that something's wrong with you, when the reality is not everybody, some people are meant to get married.
Yeah, you know? I mean, even biblically, it says like not everyone should or will be married.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, and it just, I love the church and I love so many people in the church, but at the same time, there's also some cultures, there's things that could be improved upon and done 100%. Better. And talking about relationships openly and the effects that they have in your life, and, you know, how you should go about relationships, like that's definitely something that could be worked on. And I think so many people are opening dialogue about that, which is beautiful, and which is also why podcasts and stuff like this is great. But like for me, I'm a very open person. So somebody asks me, I'll be like, oh yeah, I 100% idolize marriage. And it, for when the time comes that I have kids and they ask about me, the why behind that is going to be so important. I'm not just going to tell them, you know, like, you know, don't have sex, don't date, don't get in relationships, don't do A, B, and C. It's like, hey, like, just so you know, if you get married this is what you need to know.
Right.
You know, these are the questions that you need to ask specifically. Like, these are red flags that you need to look for. And for me, like, I'll encourage my kids to date. Of course, there's going to be like boundaries involved with emotional things. And if it's not appropriate for like a 12-year-old to be going alone over to a boy's house, that's not going to happen. You know? I think there needs to be like intervention with some things, but like, I think the open dialogue is so important around dating, especially for parents. And although I love my parents, I do wish I would have had that. I think it would have changed a lot for me. But again, you live and you learn, and all you can do is take what you have and the information that you have, and then change the way that you raise your kids, and you learn from your parents, you know?
Yeah. And we're all trying to do the right thing. I feel like it's hard. I feel like a lot of like the older generation kind of gets mad at this generation for like how like woke we are, whatever you want to call it. And like we talk about these things, but I think parents, like everyone's obviously trying to do their best. And I think we all do the best with the information that we have.
Absolutely.
Right. So at the time that is their best or your best or whatever it is. And so I think giving ourselves grace, but also trying to open up these conversations so we can make changes for the future, which is why I'm so excited to be talking about this with you, because I feel like that is something that it just changes things. Like I don't know if this is so off topic, but there's this guy named, I'm trying to remember his name, but he runs a channel. It's called Soft White Underbelly, and he interviews like drug addicts and prostitutes and all these people on Skid Row. And so he raises a ton of money for them. He'll like put them up in apartments, and he'll like let them tell their story.
Interesting.
And he always tells people, because what happens is he'll get these people apartments, he'll like give them every option to get out of the situation that they're in, and then they'll end up back on the street willingly. And he always says, I'm not doing this necessarily for these people, because they're not going to change. What they know is what they know, and they're stuck in their ways. It's going to take a lot of years of unlearning for them to ever get to that place, but it's to shed awareness on this so this can stop happening, and we can start raising our kids better, and we can start understanding how trauma leads to these things. Like he's like, I'm trying to bring awareness for the future generation. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so it's like, I think we're all kind of trying to do that now with like the social media thing, everyone that's on, and like how it's such a cool place where we can talk about our experiences, because it's not to say that we can change everything that's happened in the past, but trying to help people maybe in the future that can learn from our mistakes.
And that's the beautiful thing about what we do too, is we have access to the internet, and we have access to platforms where we can talk to a million people, you know, if we want, or even just thousands of people, or like a small group of people that you know you can impact. But it's beautiful that we have that, and we have the internet where if we have a question, we can Google it. And if we want to know how to parent, we can look that up, and we have books and so many resources, whereas our parents didn't have that. And so, I mean, like, it was their first time living too. And that's why I think what you said, Grace, is so important in all aspects for yourself and for other people, and especially with the other generation too, because understanding the generations before us, they were kind of limited on resources. But it's so beautiful that we have that, because we can now be the ones who start that open dialogue for the people coming after us too.
Awesome. So good. Okay, we're gonna kind of trace back into the marriage and divorce a little bit. So you said that when things started to shift for you was when you found out that your husband was unfaithful. And that's when you started to kind of look at maybe the other things that had been going on, that you were like, okay, also these things are actually not good, that I've kind of been tolerating. What was that like when you kind of realized not only, you know, has this person been unfaithful, but also like there's these other issues in this? Like what did that feel like for you? What was that experience like?
I mean, in simplest terms, it's earth shattering, you know? It rips your whole life apart. It's really like having the rug dragged out from under you. And when we get married, we never picture us separating from that person. We're not intended to.
You're like, I'm actually planning to spend forever with you.
It's like, just so you know, I'm planning on spending the rest of my life.
It's like, oh, I vowed to you for life, but maybe not. No, it's like we say, yes, I do forever.
Exactly. You know, you plan to, and nobody plans for divorce. Obviously, you know, there's extreme situations where it is necessary. But for me and my experience, when I realized all of that, it was like I was waking up from a dream almost. And it truly, like, I got slapped in the face, and I just realized, I'm like, but it was also a slow process, because I realized one thing, and I was so focused on that one little event. And in the grand scheme of things, like, that's not why I got divorced. It was a factor, of course, but a very small factor. And it was really like, that was just a symptom of a whole different sickness in the relationship. You know, people, when somebody is unfaithful or somebody cheats in a relationship, there's usually a deeper lying reason.
No one's just gonna go cheat for fun. Like there's already disloyalty happening in the relationship
in one way or
another.
And for me, like, that was heartbreaking, yes, finding that out. But in the grand scheme of things, the thing that was like truly earth-shattering for me was that I was kind of living in this delusion at the time where I thought everything was great, but I didn't realize that the health of the relationship was just not there. And I didn't realize how toxic and unhealthy being in that situation was for me, and that it truly was harming me. I didn't realize at the time. That was the part that I think was the most like life-shattering for me, was once I started to intentionally open up different dialogue and conversations and bring in counselors and mentors and people in my life and in my church and in my small group that I trusted, and just like seeking out like advice and help and direction to try to deal with my situation. I think that's the part that became life-shattering for me, because it was just such an awakening in my life that I realized like this relationship is very unhealthy. And like, I didn't know at the time, because I think I was very naive, especially at the time when I got married. But once I started to have these like open, aware conversations, very intentional conversations, and, you know, bringing my ex into it as well, it wasn't until that point and until we really started to involve like therapy and just people that we trusted that I realized, I was like, oh no, my life is like crumbling. Like, I didn't realize the extent of things. Yeah.
Well, and it's one thing to realize, like, you know, in your own space or in your guys' space, oh, like there's issues here that we need to deal with. It's a whole nother level of shame and humility to like go to people and be like, hey, this like marriage, like our marriage, which is a huge part of your life, is like not really great, and this is what's like, it's very, you know, for me it was really embarrassing. Like it was like, it felt very shameful to be like, oh, like I need help, like we need help, you know. And so when you realize that even internally it's so hard, but then to like seek out, it's like it's such a complicated weird thing, because it feels like such a exposed, vulnerable part of you. Like your marriage is something that's so sacred and special and like vulnerable. And so when you start to see that there's issues, it's like it feels very exposing to be like, oh, my marriage is not working, or like you know what I mean? Like it's
we're
like
not doing a good enough job.
It's like, and then bringing people in sometimes can be so good, but then obviously sometimes can be bad, because people's opinions can be, I don't know about for you, but for me it was hard, because it's like I was so sensitive because it mattered so much to me, and it was such a vulnerable part of me that it felt like I was exposing that for people to like openly judge and speak into, which was good. I needed it, but it was hard for me to hear.
It's very hard,
you know.
Absolutely. And I'm so thankful. I feel like God set up people in my life at the time who, you know, I had a full marriage group, and I thought, at the time I was like, you know, this group is going to judge me. They are going to like ridicule my decision if I decide to leave. And it was such a miracle. That did not happen. Every single person in that group, they had my back. You know, they were there for me through thick and thin. They made sure I was doing okay. They were there to support me. And of course they understood the severity of the situation, but I really thought that I would be, you know, pushed out of that. But like, they were all, my church was really what saved me through that. And it was so beautiful. And I feel like God lined up those people in my life to be there and to be like a voice of like truth and stability, and just to provide like just any type of rock for me to cling to during such a difficult and confusing time. And I just had such great people, and I had like 3 or 4 different counselors and like therapists that were helping me. And it's also great because I was in the psychology space, and so I had different people in my life who could be that for me. But again, God lined up those people. So thankfully, like I did have a safe space where I could have different counselors and people in my life that were able to help me, because of course, like we went to counseling and stuff together, but I also just needed help for me. So I was like, how do I handle this gracefully? Like, how do I handle this?
And all the ways that it actually affects you. You know,
and just recovery in general and healing from obviously being hurt. And especially after leaving, when I made that decision, those people were critical in like the recovery process. And thankfully I had them, but it's absolutely, like you were saying, it's a very exposing thing. And it will humble you very quickly.
You get very humble. But you think you know everything, and then you get divorced. You're like, oh,
I don't know anything.
I don't know anything actually.
I'm just a girl.
Yeah. So, okay. So good. So kind of lead me back. So when things started to shift and you started to see, okay, this is toxic. Like there's a lot of things that need to change. Where was your heart posture? Like, were you hopeful that things would work out? Like, when was it that you were like, okay, like I can't do this anymore? Like, was that a process of this back and forth? Like, what did that look like for you?
So for me, the way that it worked was I had found everything out, stayed for a little while, and then I decided, I was like, you know what, like my heart cannot handle this. I need to move out and have my own space. So we separated, but we continued to go to counseling for a while. When it originally happened, I mean, one of the first things I was like, I forgive you, you know, like I want to move past it. I never intended to get divorced, and no matter what happened, I was fully in it for the marriage. Like I wanted that relationship to last. I never wanted to get divorced. I feel like I was kind of pushed to it, but it was a long process. And as far as me, like I never wanted divorce, but because it got so extreme, I felt like I had no option. But I stayed for a while, and I really tried, and I made it clear that, you know, that's what I wanted. And it wasn't until like months of like separation and being together in separation that I just kind of realized at one point, after so much like therapy together and self-reflection, and realizing that like, of course I'm not perfect either. You know, I definitely was not a perfect wife, and there's so many things that I should have learned beforehand, and I could have done better, and I could have been more intentional about it in the relationship. And looking back, you know, we always see that.
Totally.
So I definitely don't want to frame it that I was a perfect partner, because I definitely wasn't. You know, there's always issues and two sides to every story. But it wasn't until like months and months of just like trying and waiting. Honestly, I was just waiting on an answer from God for the longest time. I feel like until then, I had never had anything in my life where I genuinely like needed an answer from God so clearly, and that I was just waiting on it. I had never experienced that before, and I just prayed so much during this time in my life. Like it was just constant, because I had no option, you know, and I needed God so much, and I still do. But when you're going through a crisis, that's when you lean on God, you know. And I really, to answer your question, like this whole time for me, like that was just a whole waiting period, because I wanted to stay, and you know, part of me didn't know if I fully believed that it was going to happen, because it's either you stay or you go, and things either change or they don't, and if they don't change, you have to make that change for yourself, and you have to remove yourself from a bad situation. And my therapist at the time, and sorry I'm just rambling, but
this is great.
My therapist at the time, she made the analogy. She was like, right now you're in a house that's on fire, but this house fire being your marriage, it's going to take two people to put out this fire. If the house is your marriage. She was like, but if you don't have the help from the other person, eventually you have to remove yourself from the fire, or you're going to burn too. She was like, you either go down with the house or you remove yourself. And so that kind of summed up my situation. Is I was just in the house fire for the longest time. And I was just waiting on the okay from God. I was like, you know, when do I know that I've done everything that I can? And there were so many books that I read to try to help me, and counselors and people that were telling me like, have you done this? Have you tried this? And everybody, like you said, has their opinions. But it got to the point where like, I sought out one of my friends. She's another content creator. Her name's Kalia. But we sat down together in a coffee shop, and she just like prayed and prayed for me. She was like, God, like Karissa needs an answer. Like she's burning. Like she is just done with this. And like she just is exhausted and has felt like she has done everything. Like she just needs a clear answer. And it was right after that I felt like I actually got an answer from God, that I was like, okay, like I have the okay to make the decision, you know. So it was just a very long waiting period. Totally. It's a process, but
it's so crazy. I feel like I mean I relate to your story so much. Like if I could sum up my story, I mean that's same. Like it's like, and I think that's one of the hardest things to accept about marriage, is that it takes two willing people. And especially when you realize that there's toxicity and that things need to change, it's like you need two people that are self-aware enough and are willing enough to do the hard work. Because it takes a lot of work, especially after there is unfaithfulness. It's like, if you ever want to recover from that, it's like, you know, a lot of work. Like, I remember sitting with my therapist, she's like, if you do want to stay in this, like, it's going to be a lot. Like, it's going to take a lot, you know? And obviously I was like, well, yeah, like, I want to do everything I can. Like, I wanted to extend every option, you know? And like, looking back in hindsight, I'm like, I should have left earlier, but I'm glad I didn't, because I waited until I was like, okay, there's literally nothing I can do. You know what I mean?
And that's such a hard place to be too. So I feel for you, and I commend you for doing everything you can, because it is very hard. And for me, at least in my experience, like, I had to get to the point where I was so beaten down and I know you know what I'm talking about too. I feel like there's a few people who understand it. But I feel like you're one of those people.
I'm like, yes.
You're like, I know the feeling. But I remember the day too that I just like, I got to the point, and like the final straw was so stupid, you know? It was just like one little thing, and I was like, I'm done.
Yeah, you're like, that's it.
Like, I was like, I am so sorry. And I had to sit him down, and I was like, you know, and maybe this is too much, but I was like, you know, I had to get to the point with myself where I was like, God, like, I know, because I felt very clearly, I was like, God told me, like, handle this situation gracefully. And like, grace is such like an important thing for me now. And I never really understood it before. Yeah. But, and it ended up being so beautiful, but I'll come back to that. But I had to get to the point where I was like, I have no more grace to give. I have no more energy to give. Like, I have no more understanding that I can extend towards this situation. I was like, you know, like, I've accepted it for what it is, but I have genuinely like burned myself to the ground and run myself into the ground trying to give everything I have to save something that I cannot save by myself. Yeah. You know, and it's a hard place to be, but getting to that level of exhaustion with something, I think that, and then a mix of clearly hearing from God, like, okay, like, you've done everything. There's nothing else you can possibly do. When you get to that point, it's such an interesting thing, but it turned out to be such a beautiful thing, because number one, I knew with my counselors and the people that were helping me, you know, I had them to remind me later, like, no, like, you did everything that you could at the time. You know, you ran yourself into the ground, but you did it with as much grace as you possibly could. And I struggled with that for a long time after the divorce, because it was just like, did I really do everything? And then it was great because I had those people to remind me. And I was like, what if I made a mistake, you know? And I knew that I had made the right decision. And so because I felt like I had done everything, I didn't struggle as much with that. But at the time, I was struggling and like wondering, I was like, what if I could have done more? Yeah. Like, that was another time. Like, there's very few times in my life where I feel like I've heard like so clearly from God that like, I know, I'm like, this is like 100% like a full sentence from God. Like, it's rare that happens. Usually it's like little things. But like, I was struggling one day, and like, it was so crazy because I just heard God say so clearly, he was like, if you handled that situation with the grace that I told you to, and like, yeah, maybe you didn't do it perfectly, he was like, but imagine like the grace that I have for you, like, coming out of that. And so like, that just brought me so much peace. And like, it ended up being beautiful. It's a terrible place to be, you know, the exhaustion and just like giving everything you have to something with no results. But like, the grace that God has for us, doing everything that we can, and like having that respect for like marriage and just putting everything into it. I think God has so much grace for somebody like you or somebody like myself that like really wanted things to work out and valued marriage and the sacredity of it and all of that. But sometimes we can't do everything. You know?
And sometimes it's just not like, I think there's a weird stigma around divorce because Christians are like, oh, well, divorce isn't biblical, which there are biblical cases for divorce. But even if there's not, like, even for the situations that aren't and people have gotten divorced, it's like, God wants what's best for you. Like, I feel like it's like, you know, looking back, I'm like, God wanted me to be like, I thought God wants my marriage to work. God wants my marriage to heal. And I think in a perfect world, yes, God doesn't want anyone getting divorced, but also God knows, like, he sees, he's, you know, why can't I think of the word?
He's all knowing.
He's all knowing. So it's like, he doesn't want us to stay in situations that we are being abused, that we are being run down, that we are being like all of those things. It's like, we're not, kind of like you said, I think that was the wake up call I had. And it seems like you too. It's like, you can't save someone.
No.
Like you have to give them to God and let God work in them and heal them. And same for ourselves. You know, it's like, I think in marriage, we can idolize our partner and feel like they're like a savior, or we're a savior for them.
Right.
And there's this like, oh, like as long as we have each other, we're like good. But it's like, no, like we both need God. Like, you know what I mean? Like to heal, to be okay. And so I think that's like definitely like a big wake up call that I feel like you go through and you get divorced. You're like, oh, like, you know, you can't be dependent on another person and stuff. But yeah, that, I mean, that's a beautifully terrible story. How did I say that? I'm like, that's the pain, but there's obviously so much beauty in it, and you told it so amazing. So once you got to that point and you were like, okay, this is, you know, the final straw for me and I'm done. I know for me, it was such a weird place of like acceptance. Like I was so, kind of like you said, and I want to tap into that exhaustion. I think, you get to a point where you like mentally have been trying to push through, but like you said, our bodies, you can't trick your body. My therapist always used to tell me that. She's like, Nicole, you can sit here all day and tell yourself you're okay and like do all these things, but your body knows like it's gonna catch up. And so for months after I got divorced, I was like, oh my, I mean, I literally was like sick. Like I was not well physically, mentally either, but like everything caught up to me. Like I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. I was mentally pushing through, but then your body just shuts down and is like, no. So like, what was that experience like for you? So once you had that conversation, obviously you went through all the emotions, I'm sure, but how did you build yourself back up? Like, what was that experience like? And we kind of talked about this before, but obviously being on social media, there was a pressure for you to like continue to post probably and continue to like be happy, and like no one wants to see what's actually going on behind the scenes. And it's also so complex that you're not gonna like be like, hey guys, I've been sitting in bed all day crying and I can't eat. How are you? Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not gonna be what you're gonna post. So it's like, how did you navigate that when you did decide, okay, I'm ready to take this step and get a divorce? How did you navigate that on social media? Did you feel that pressure?
Right. Well, I think there's definitely two aspects to the question. Number one, the healing process as far as my body. I mean, my body was suffering during the marriage. I just didn't realize that that's why, you know? But then after I absolutely experienced what you're talking about, just the trauma catching up to you. I think number one, especially if you're in any type of marriage or relationship where there is any type of abuse, which cheating is emotional abuse. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that, but it's a fact. It absolutely is. And if there's any type of somebody taking advantage of you or abusing you in any capacity, or even just any type of toxic relationship, there's so much trauma that comes along with that physically. And for me, the exhaustion and all of that, I was just in fight or flight for so long, fighting through this situation. Felt like I was completely alone and isolated. And I truly was just exerting every ounce of emotional energy that I had into this situation. And I was genuinely just exhausted, you know, and I got to the point after where once I had finally gotten into my own apartment and I had gotten out on my own, and when we were finally no contact, the exhaustion was crazy. I felt like I could not sleep enough, but I was always like weak at the same time. And there was just like this pit, like occasionally like I'll still have it, you know, but there's just like a pit in your stomach and in your chest that just like is constant. Like it's like the physical heartbreak. It just stays with you. And I was just so sick. I think I lost like 30 pounds in like several months. And granted, like one thing that I clung to was like I was always in the gym because that was just such a rock for me. And I love exercise and I'm very passionate about fitness. And so like I did have that, but that working together was just like constantly being unwell and sick and just having that nausea.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So funny. I like everything. It's crazy. That's why these conversations are so cool. So sorry not to cut you off, but like when you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, like someone actually gets it. That's like that pit you were talking about, like something just feels like, like something's like dying inside of you. It's like something feels just like wrong.
Yes.
Like you just wake up and it feels like you're like, it's just so interesting you said that. Anyways, carry on. But I'm like, wow.
No, and it's a feeling in your core. And like for me, like it's been less than 2 years since I got divorced. Like I still have that, you know? Yeah. But it's less in my stomach and more just like in my chest now. It's just like a constant like physical pain, and it's very hard to describe.
Yeah.
And I've tried to relate to some of my friends. I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. There's just days where it's like painful, but like it's not that I'm sad. It's just like the trauma that's absorbed.
You're kind of feeling it in your body.
Yes. Yeah. Like your body still will suffer from the trauma of the situation. And even if you're happy and in another relationship, like you can still have the physical like resounding trauma. Like the residual trauma, excuse me. But that factor of it, that was definitely the hardest part for me, was just like fighting the physical exhaustion. And then getting into your second question about like social media, I was so distraught on how to handle this situation that I just kind of went silent for a while. I think for me, because we were both public, it was confusing, and I wanted to be careful, of course, too, because there were a lot of factors in my divorce and my situation. So I eventually, like when we separated, I had just like, I never actually changed my name legally, and so like I just started going by my normal username again. And I think like people saw that we stopped posting together, so I never said anything about it, and I never like made an official post to say like I got divorced. I just kind of left it alone, and I backed off of social media for quite a while while all this was going on, because at the time my ex didn't support my social media anyway. He never liked it, and so like I wasn't as active at the time during the time that I was like married that last year. And so like sometimes people just like assumed, and I kind of got to the point where I'm like, I don't owe anybody an explanation. And I had talked like in depth with my therapist about this, and she was like, right now, like your like health and well-being is the most important thing. You know, like you can worry about the rest of that later. And I think I kind of got to the point where like after my divorce, I was open about it on my social media, but it took a while, and I just needed things to calm down for a little while. But there was absolutely like still the pressure to post, and people don't really post those ugly sides of life on their social media. And I think that's why I love TikTok so much too, is because people are more open about things that they're going through.
Absolutely.
And that's why like for me it's such a safe space, because like I post about my trauma and stuff all the time, you know, and there's so many people that relate to it, and I think we all find like comfort and like healing in that a little bit. And so like that's why I love like short form video and TikTok and things like that, because you can do that there. It's like more acceptable socially, whereas like if I'm not gonna post on Instagram and be like I'm depressed today, you know?
Yeah. They're totally different. They're different platforms, different vibes.
Sure. But there's absolutely still like the pressure to post, but I still kind of took my time with it. And I've talked slightly about my divorce, but it's not something that I really outwardly advertise a lot. It's
totally.
Like, but people know. You know, they know. And they've also seen that I've been in like other relationships and things since. I've had 2 boyfriends in the last like year and a half since then, both like more short-term things. But one I think I never told anybody about publicly.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
We'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay, well, amazing. So, well, not amazing, but that was good. So I want to talk about looking back. So now we kind of know a little bit of context, kind of what the start of that process looked like. I want to get more into healing later, but first I want to talk about what are some of the red flags that you would warn people about, or things that you're like, these are things that need to be figured out before you get married. Like, what are some things looking back that you feel like you learned about marriage, or like things that you won't tolerate in a relationship, or signs or things that can tell you maybe this person's not right for you or not the healthiest person?
Honestly, the biggest one for me is priorities. I think at the time, maybe I didn't know my priorities, and I wasn't prioritizing my faith in the way that I should have. And for all the people listening, whether you're a person that believes in God or whatever you believe in, the person that you are going to do your life with needs to be on the same page. And that's just a personal opinion that I have. And from my own experience, I will never marry somebody that God isn't their top priority. Because ultimately, like in my opinion, that's what led to the downfall of my marriage the first time, because I failed to ask the right questions, and I failed to, you know, prioritize that. I ended up with somebody that didn't have God as a top priority. You know, he believed in God, you know, but it's so different than having somebody who God is the center of your life decisions. When you get into core arguments and you get into the deep stuff and you have real issues, your priorities are going to come out, and that is going to be that's going to be where you make your game time decisions.
Right.
Is like, what does God want for our marriage? You know,
Right.
we have these very real problems. Where do we turn?
Right.
Do we turn to God? Do we turn to just getting angry at each other and just doing whatever we want? You know, that's when that stuff matters. And of course it always matters, but like those are the moments when it's like real and you're like, does this person prioritize God?
Oh,
faith?
yeah.
And so for me, like having priorities as far as number one, your faith, having some shared similar interests, like stuff like that as far as priorities is also good. But as far as your core beliefs, like you need to be on the same page. So that was a big one that I should have prioritized more. And you know, he believed in God, but there were some things as like, where does this priority fall in your life?
Right.
You know, when it gets down to real stuff, like how much of this is a priority for you? And so like the other red flag leading into that is that we didn't have those deep conversations. And I ended up with somebody that I wrote off as just being simple, you know, and didn't like to have very like raw conversations like, oh, it's just a simple-minded person, unproblematic type of thing. But really what I was getting into was a relationship that I should have noticed before, that like somebody that's not willing to dive deep into emotional conversations and having deep conversations and open conversations about hard stuff, that's not a good thing.
Right.
You know, that's not somebody being simple. That's somebody that is emotionally not available and that is emotionally not going to be there to catch you when you fall. And I think now that's become such a higher priority for me in dating, is like somebody that is self-aware and somebody that wants to have very deep and theological and like ethical conversations and wants to really work through things. And I think at the time I didn't understand the severity of that and how critical that is to a relationship. And having that will be make it or break it, because there are going to be times when you have to sit down and have very hard conversations. And that's what marriage is. I mean, any long-term relationship is a lot of work and a lot of talking and a lot of conversations and a lot of compromise and sacrifice. And you got to be with somebody that's self-aware enough to do that. So any lack of self-awareness is like a huge red flag. I think the way that you treat other people says so much about you. And like even the way you treat service workers, it says so much more about you treating them that way than how they're serving you or anything. Like just having grace and understanding for people. And the biggest thing I think with that and the way you treat other people is just empathy. I think one of the biggest red flags is somebody that's not empathetic and understanding towards other people. When you, instead of God, like if you are your own top priority as opposed to like serving other people or, you know, being in community or your relationship with God, when you yourself or money or anything like that is your top priority, that's a big problem. You know, and that in relationships can come up in little ways, just like when you are with somebody, like how they're talking about other people behind their back and the things that they say, or the way that they are judgmental towards others and the things that they say behind closed doors, like that's when you really see somebody's character. And character is so important, you know, it's the most important thing. But how people act behind closed doors and how they treat other people and the things that they say about them when they're not there. Things like that can be huge character red flags, you know. And even just like the way that you prioritize money over people, things like that. There's so many that you can get into. But even like I always end up watching videos on like narcissistic abuse and things because there's so much that I relate to, and seeing things like that, just like the lack of empathy and regard for other people, or like people not prioritizing, you know, making time for others or doing something special for them on like birthdays and holidays, things like that. There's so many different ones that you can get into. But
it sucks because I know there's like a stigma of like, oh, well, you don't always have to believe in the same thing to be together. Because it's like, yes, beliefs change, like things happen. And I don't think that means like, you know, it's the end of everything for relationships. I think people can work through it. I think it's hard, but I do think that like love isn't enough. Like love will never be enough for your marriage to work. Like it takes two people that are committed to not only being healthy, but like that share the same goals and life values. Like it's really hard to walk in a marriage with someone who isn't on the same page as you. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
Right.
not, and again, and things do change, but going into it is something you should definitely like be wary of. And also, like you said, having their priority be God. And I've always heard this, and, you know, I really think it's true. Like, if they don't know how to walk in relationship with God, they're not going to know how to like love you properly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like they need to learn love from the maker of love and the one who is the most loving. And it's like, if they don't know that, how are they going to be able to really love you properly? Because love isn't feelings. It's not based on feelings. And I think people think that like, oh, well, I feel like I like this person today. I feel, and it's like, no, love is a choice.
Yeah.
It's a commitment and it's work. You know what I mean? It's not like a feeling. And because of the generation we live in, like feelings are so fleeting and people just care about what they want and what they feel. And it's like so much deeper than that. So I love that you said that. But yeah, those are some good red flags to look out for. I really want to talk about with you the healing process. So like take me back to when you moved out and you said you had started to like physically feel the damage. You lost a lot of weight. You were obviously in therapy working through all that. What was the healing process from you like? For you when you got divorced?
Yeah. I think the biggest things, number one, a lot of therapy. You know, coming up to now, I feel like I should go more than I do. I wish I could go more often. But therapy was huge. I had an amazing counselor. Her name's Melissa. She's great.
Shout out to Melissa.
Shout out Melissa. But I don't know how I would have survived it without her. She was just there to support me and validate things and answer questions that I had, you know, because she specialized in the type of situation that I was in. And she was able to really help me from start to finish getting through that process. I had so many good friends. Like I said, my marriage group, I had them. They would individually meet with me. The woman that like heads the group, she would faithfully just reach out to me and make sure, you know, how are you doing? Like, can you come over? Can we have lunch? Like, can we talk about where you're at and like how I can help? I had some people in my life that really stepped up, and I had, you know, my siblings, they were really, really there for me. And, you know, they were just there to listen and be there and support me in any way that they could. And the healing process was very rough. I mean, there was the exhaustion factor. There was a factor of like still having to work and still having to make money and still having to
operate like a normal functioning human.
Yeah, when you're really not.
Yeah, when you're like, I'm actually not right now. I'm not okay.
And for a while, like I couldn't really do anything. But I did, one thing that I'm glad that I did is I like forced myself to have fun. And I don't mean like going to like party or like do insane stuff, but I mean just forcing myself to have fun, like getting out in nature. And I spent so much time near the ocean. Like anytime something goes wrong in my life, I'll be at the ocean. Anytime I'm going through something, I will drive to the ocean.
You're like, find me at the ocean, everyone.
That's why my Instagram's so beachy, for anyone that's wondering.
She's a Florida girl through and through.
I've spent a lot of time there. You know, the ocean is just like a very healing place. It's beautiful. But I spent so much time just being with friends and reconnecting with the community because my relationship was so isolating. And, you know, another red flag is just being isolated from your family and friends and people that you care about and that care about you. That's a huge one. But I, towards the end of my relationship, was so isolated from everyone. And it took me like getting back into my community in different places, you know, in my church and in my groups and just like my close circle of friends, like reconnecting with friends that I hadn't been spending that time with. That was huge, I think, in the healing process for me, is getting your community back and spending so much time just forcing myself to actually have fun again after like a time in my life where I was just like exhausted and like mentally and emotionally just beaten up. And that was huge for me. Just forcing myself, like even on the days when I didn't feel it, like giving myself things that like I needed to do.
Totally.
And forcing yourself to kind of operate normally and getting back into those habits, that was huge for me. But there were definitely days that I just could not do it, you know?
Yeah, no, but I feel like that's a real thing. I always used to like that's one regret I have of like I feel like when I was going through my process is I felt like, well, I'm just sad. It's like, I can't have happy moments. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I'm mad or I'm sad or I'm not okay because I wasn't okay. And so like when I did have moments of joy, even just smallest moments with friends or family or whatever, it's like I didn't want to let myself have that because I was just like, but I'm just like sad. You know what I mean? And I feel like healing is such a, especially from divorce, it's such a complicated process because you feel so many emotions within a day. It's like you're feeling this grief, this loss, this anger, this confusion, this like questioning, but then you're like, oh, actually I feel peace, I feel acceptance. Oh wait, I feel this is fun. Relief. I'm having joy. I feel relief. It's such a weird feeling because you're like, I'm feeling all these things.
Right.
How am I doing? And it's like weird to know how things are. And then you can feel like you're doing good and you can feel like, oh, I've made all this progress. I'm happy. I'm doing better. And then one thing just like sets you back and you feel like you're back in the same place.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's like such a weird, complicated. So I love that you said that, like forcing yourself, even when you don't feel like trying to be a normal human and going out and having fun and just being with people you love and letting yourself have joy. It's like we like to steal that from us. I like you said that was a part that really helped me heal, was like letting myself have good moments. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Within the darkness of it all, because it's darkness for a long time like that. But I feel like that's part of the grieving process is like you go through all the stages, and especially from divorce, because it is so complicated, it takes a really long time to be okay. And you're going to keep having moments. Right. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And I like what you said about it being a grieving process. I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that for me in counseling, one thing that we talked a lot about is that divorce is like a death. And I don't want to offend anybody by saying that because I know it is different. But for me, if my ex-husband had died, I probably would have gone through the same grieving process. You know, it is very different. But a person is almost dying to you in your life, you know, but they're still alive.
Well, you're grieving someone who's still there. Yeah. But they're not in your, like, they're in the world, you know, they're out there, but the death of them in your life is real. Like the absence of them. It's like, I know this person exists. I know this person is on this earth, but like, not for me anymore, which is crazy. It's such a weird thing, grieving someone who's still alive.
Yeah. And it really is like a very complicated grieving process. And you go through the stages of grief, you know, like I couldn't name them off the top of my head. I'm trying
to think. I think it's like denial, anger, sadness, or anger, depression. Yeah. I'm trying to think of all of them.
I can't remember.
Bargaining or something. Yeah. I would have to look at it, but I'd
have to look at the list. And they don't always happen in order.
No, they bounce around.
Yeah. And like for me, I would just have like spurts of all these different things. And it is so confusing. And I compare it to losing a loved one because like you have those moments in your life where you're like, I just want to feel joy. Like I should be enjoying this, but I can't. You know, like I'm experiencing these other layered emotions and I just feel like I can't enjoy this other thing in my life. And it is such a complicated healing process, but that's where like having your faith comes in too, because like God sees everything, you know, and like it just, I don't know, if I genuinely didn't have a relationship with God, I would not have survived any of this.
Literally
I would not be here.
I tell people all the time, I'm like, if I didn't have Jesus, if I didn't find him amidst my separation, like I don't know where I would be. Like I don't know. Like he solely got me through, which I think people think God's not in divorce and that like he doesn't understand it, or that like, I just feel like there's this weird stigma, but it's like he is so in it. He is so in it for the people who are going through it, and he understands you better than anyone ever would, which it doesn't feel like that sometimes, but it's like he gets it, you know.
And he sees everything.
Yeah, he sees everything. You know? He knows everything.
And like we were talking about earlier, there's so few people that can understand situations, which I'm so grateful that I have you too, because it's so similar. But there's not going to be anybody that 100% understands absolutely everything that you've gone through. Yep. But like as far as Jesus, like Jesus sees everything. He sees things that you don't even know happen. Like there's things that I know I don't even know. Right. Because, you know, I probably shouldn't say that.
No, I hear you.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah,
you know,
I hear you. Totally.
There's things that happen that I don't know about. Right. And there were so much there were so many lies in my situation that when I left, I didn't know the truth.
Yeah.
You know, but I knew that God knew.
Yeah.
And like that had to be
and that
enough
he had
for me.
released you and been like, okay.
Exactly.
Like,
and there's so much peace that comes from that. And if I didn't have that to lean on, and if I didn't have God to lead me in the right direction, or, you know, give me that release to go, and then be there for me and provide people for me during the healing process. And it is so miraculous the way that God provides people.
Yeah.
And I think I told you this, but like I knew before I got divorced, you like came up, and I was like, I literally felt like God said something to me. It was like, you and Nicole are going to be like good friends.
So
but like,
crazy.
That was before we even started talking.
I know, because when we first started talking, it was, I mean, you were still married when we became friends. And I mean, it was crazy timing, because I think pretty shortly after we started talking was when everything happened for you.
But it's so weird. And then you like reached out to me one day. I was like, how did I know this was going to happen? Like, this is so weird. But then like fast forward to now, it's so funny, because you've been one of the people that I feel like I can really relate to in this situation, which is just like, God's so good and faithful.
Yeah, he is.
And I'm not a perfect Christian, you know, like I'm the first one to say that. Like, I have made a lot of mistakes, and like I'm 24 and divorced. Like I have not had a perfect life, you know, but like God has always, like, God's never failed me.
Right.
You know,
he's always
like,
provided.
Yeah. God provides people. He provides resources. Like you are not powerful enough to get off of the path that God has for you. Like, God will redirect you.
100%.
And God provides, and he's faithful. And like, I don't know how I would survive if I didn't have faith.
Yeah. So awesome.
You know?
So that healing journey for you was obviously really complex, like you said. And you said therapy was a big part of it for sure. I feel like there is a weird stigma around therapy. Yeah. I'm like so pro therapy. I think God puts people on earth that can specialize and learn things and have knowledge and can help us. And I think God obviously is the ultimate healer. But I think having someone walk you through it, like, I know for me, I always joked, I was like, Jesus in therapy is like what got me through. But it was. And I feel like I got a lot of flack for like the therapy thing of like, oh, well, you don't need therapy. I'm like, no, we all need therapy. You know what I mean? It's such an important part of any grieving process, I feel like, because it is so complex and it's so confusing to go through, because you're like, is this normal? Am I normal? Like, you know, am I healing? Because healing is so not linear. Like, people always say that, but it really is not linear,
and it's different for everyone.
It's so different. And I heard this analogy once, and I still use it to this day because I love it. But it's like, when you think about your trauma, or you think about an event or something that you had to grieve, something that hurts you, it's like, when you start to heal, it's kind of like you have a ball in a small box. And so when you first go through that, it's gonna hit a lot. It's going to hit the sides of the box, and every time it hits, it's going to hurt, right? Yeah. And over time, it's not that the ball ever leaves the box, it's that the box gets bigger. So it's like, over time, it's not going to hit as many times and affect you, but it's still going to hit and it's still going to hurt, but it's not going to hurt as much, right? Because the ball is getting, like, the box is getting bigger and stronger. The ball is staying the same size, right? So it still bounces around, but it's not going to hit as much, and it's not going to hurt as deep, you know? And I feel like that's so real. It's like, you think, oh, I'm just going to be healed from something and I'm fine. But it's like, especially with divorce, it's such a complicated thing that even post, you know, years later, you can be like, oh, that kind of hurts, you know? And it's like, oh, okay, I can see where that stems from. Definitely. You know? So I love that you kind of explained similar things as me. I don't love that, but it is even reassuring for me to be like, wait, she gets it. Okay, we're back. We had a little bathroom break, and I got Coco because she was having a moment. Okay, so now I want to talk about, so we talked a little bit about the healing process. We talked about kind of the pressure of social media. Now I want to talk about like life after divorce, because I feel like it is so interesting. It's kind of like this weird thing to be like, I'm divorced, and like it changes the way you walk in everything, in dating and even friendship, because it is like you feel kind of disconnected from the world, because it really does kind of set you apart. And I feel like there is a lot of judgment around divorce. So what's been life after divorce like, being a divorced woman? Let's talk about that.
I mean, it definitely puts you in a different category, and it does make it harder for people to relate to you, but at the same time, it allows you to relate to so many people on a different level. So it is different. As far as dating, it's very odd. I expected so many people to be less accepting of me. but I feel like it's made me like an interesting person to date, you know, and it's definitely made me more self-aware. And so I feel like my relationships after divorce have honestly been so much better, because I'm aware of so many more things in myself. Coco's so cute. I can't stop looking. Sorry, but no, it's definitely, I feel like it's definitely made me a better partner for sure. But it is hard because there's no rule book. Yeah. You know, it's like, when do you tell somebody that you're divorced? Is it like a first date conversation? And like for me, it has, I think, been a first date conversation, because when they ask about myself, like that's such a big part of my story. And it's hard to, I feel like one thing for me is like, I've had to intentionally tell myself like, this is part of my story, not part of my identity as a person, because I think that it's easy to confuse those two things, and they are different. Divorce isn't something that like defines me as a person, but it's something that has gotten me to where I am.
Totally. And it's a big part of the story which led you to who you are, you know. It's not to say that that's why who you are is who you are, but I feel the same. It's like, you can't really avoid it because it's such a big part of what made you who you are, but it's not who you are. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And who you are is so much more like broad than that. You know, like that's not a box that you have to put yourself into. It's something that's helped to shape who you are, but it isn't who you are.
I love that.
And so like it's a beautiful thing, and that goes for any type of trauma too. Your trauma is something that defines why you are who you are, but it doesn't define you as a person, and you're not trapped in that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And with dating and trauma, I mean, any trauma will affect your relationships. It's going to come out eventually, and it is going to affect you. But with divorce, it definitely has made dating harder, you know, and even friendships. It makes friendships different. I think a lot of my good friends have seen me go through this process, and I'm so grateful for them. And in a way, it's really deepened my friendships, because it's allowed me to be open on a different level with people, and be vulnerable in the sense that, like, you know, you're not always perfect. I think it's easy for friends who aren't close friends to look at your situation and be like, oh, you look great. You know, you lost a lot of weight. You're doing fine. You look like you're happy and having fun. You must be doing great. You must not be suffering from your divorce. You must be all good, you know? And, but with my close friends, you know, it's allowed me to have such a deeper relationship with them, because they've seen me on those days where, like,
it's seen you at your worst.
Am behind the scenes having a horrible day and like really struggling, even like, you know, a long time after. Like I still have days where like something comes up and it's still affecting me, whatever. But my close friends, I think it's allowed me to have such a deeper connection with them because they've seen it. You know, and vulnerability creates freedom. And I think allowing yourself to be vulnerable in that sense with your good friends too, it can really deepen and strengthen your relationships.
Totally.
But I think the biggest areas that it's affected is definitely like my dating relationships, that it's a lot different for me now.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. When you got divorced, you obviously had time to just continue healing and recovering. And then when is it that you started dating again? What was that experience like? Like, I feel like it was so weird to just speak into it for a second. Like being like, oh, this person's my husband. Like I'm going to spend forever with this person. And then like, oh, I'm like single and like date. Like it's such a weird thing to like start dating again. It's empowering and it's good, but it's definitely weird. So what was like your first experience, like your first date or your first relationship like after divorce?
So I honestly, this is one of the areas where I messed up. So I jumped into like a weird situationship type of thing, like relationship, not relationship, like right after. And like really, I think I was just like so numb to life, and I was so just like turned off emotionally because I had just been in survival mode for so long that, like, number one, I didn't really care. I didn't really care about anything. I was like, oh, people say like you should wait 2 years before getting married again or getting in a serious relationship, but like I feel fine, like I'm surviving, I'm doing my day to day, and I like met somebody that I have fun with, makes me happy, like I'm gonna date him. And so like it was just like I wasn't all there, you know, and I was really recovering. And in the grand scheme of things, like that relationship, sort of, not relationship, I don't even know, but we did end up dating eventually, like months later. But it didn't last very long. But I think like it did help me at the time because I had somebody to be there for me and make sure that I was like eating and had groceries, and he did help me in a sense. But like I look back now and I'm like, you would have been fine without it. It's just like at the time I didn't care.
Yeah, I mean it's all part of it though.
Yeah, and it was definitely part of the healing process. And I think that person and their family was there for me for a while I needed them. And we don't talk anymore because now they hang out with my ex-husband, which is yeah, we can always cut that out. No,
I get it. I'm like because it's always interesting how that stuff works
that was really fun.
We love that. We hate that, but hey, that's real. That's real stuff that happens so that people are experiencing, and it's hard to deal with.
It is. And that's another thing with divorce too, is that there are going to be people who pick a side.
Yeah. Well, when you have a lot of you build a life together, so you have a lot of friends and each other's family, like that's a whole nother side of it. Like you have all these people in your life that you guys knew together. And so it's kind of like, what do we do with these people? People pick a side, people try to be there for both of you, but sometimes you just need someone who's there for you. I feel like it is hard when, like, obviously you want them to support everyone, but it's definitely so weird. It feels like you have to just create a whole new life because you can't have it's hard to have shared people, especially initially. I feel like later down the line you can have relationships with shared individuals, but at the start it's way too hard.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, for me, like at the time, I was just so like traumatized by this situation. I blocked anybody that I met through him.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
I was like, I don't want them watching me. I don't want them to see my life. I don't want to be I was getting like harassed by people from like his side of things because I don't know what they were told or what story about me they were told. There were a lot of things that were said about me that weren't true, and it just, I couldn't handle it at the time. And so I just completely like cut off everybody. And at the time, like that was the right answer for me.
Totally.
And that allowed me to have some peace and not have to worry as much about that. And it, like the healing process and then getting back into dating, it was very confusing. And of course, like looking back now, I'm like, I definitely wasn't ready for a relationship. And there's so much healing and just self-reflection that has to take place after a divorce that like, it's hard to know when you even are ready for a relationship. And then fast forward to now, like I really have, I guess I had one relationship in between then. And like, even then I feel like I could have used more time, but then fast forward to now, like I've been in a phase of like forcing myself to go on first dates and talk to different types of people and get to know people and practice like asking questions on dates as far as like finding out people's priorities and learning about them and having those hard conversations that I wish I would have had before I got married,
right?
You know, and learning how to do that and open up those conversations and force myself to get comfortable with that. And I feel like for me, like I've grown so much just from that phase, and I feel like that was so important for me. But like, of course, I'm not in love with anybody right now. It's definitely a journey. And it takes time, but like I'm very comfortable where I'm at.
You're doing amazing. You're doing so much better. It's seriously like, it's so weird. I feel like for a long time I was like really embarrassed about my divorce. Like I had so much shame around it. And even like in dating, it's like weird, like I'm divorced, like, you know, because like I feel like before I got divorced, I was like, I would never date a divorced person. You know what I mean? Like you have that. No, I'm like,
you should date a divorced girl. Like they're so self-aware.
Yeah, no, they're great. But it's funny because until you go through something like divorce, you are so humbled to see like, oh, I don't know everything about life, and you can start to have empathy for all people in all situations because you understand like you don't know what it is like to really walk in it, you know? And it's so easy from us on the outskirts to look in and like judge situations when we just haven't lived them and we don't get it. But yeah, I feel like it was really weird for me and I was like really embarrassed. But it is such a cool place. Like when you get to the place where you actually see it as like, it's actually fascinating. It's kind of cool. Like it's honestly such, I feel like a superpower to be divorced because you are forced when you get divorced to learn so much. Like you have so much growth. You become so much more independent. You learn to love yourself. Like you are beaten down to the ground. You have to build yourself back up. And you know, you usually know what you don't want or what you want. So it's like, I think it's actually amazing now. Like I used to be like embarrassed and be like, oh, I'm divorced, but I'm like, I'm divorced, everyone. Like it's fine. You know what I mean? Like I have no shame around it, but it took a long time to get there. Like I did definitely have a lot of shame. So I want to talk about something you said. So you said you've had 2 people that you've dated since. And I know we talked about this a little bit before, but
I already know what's coming.
I know everyone on the internet wants to know. So can you tell us what happened with Granola Boy?
Yes. So it doesn't matter what I post. Every single post, somebody's asking about Granola Boy. Like, what happened? What happened? Really, there's nothing bad that happened. Granola Boy's great. Christian is his name. But the internet knows him as Granola Boy. He's a fantastic person. I have all the respect in the world for him. He's a great guy. It just wasn't the right relationship for me. And we dated for a few months, and I knew in my heart, like, this isn't the person that I can marry in the future. Like, this isn't the person for me. And it was nothing against him. It just, we're different people, and it doesn't mean that I don't still appreciate him. Like, I think he's a great person. We don't talk anymore, but I also told him directly, I'm like, I have all the respect in the world for you, and I think that you're great, but I don't think this is for me. And I want to just be very straightforward about that. And I took some time. I told him, I was like, hey, like, I'm questioning things, and I need to take some time for myself. I need like a week or something to take that time and see if this is my own problems from my divorce coming up, and he was very understanding about all of that and really worked with me. Like, we had a lot of deep conversations about my divorce and just things I had been through. And he was fantastic at just like being there for me and understanding and just being empathetic, and he was amazing. And I told him, I was like, I need some time to sort out and make sure this isn't just my problems coming up and that this is actually just not the right fit. And so he was completely understanding. He allowed me to take time and do that. And that's what I did. I spent a lot of time like talking to different counselors and like different friends who had seen me walk through this. And I was like, no, like, I just know this isn't right. And I like prayed about it too. And I was like, I don't think this is it. It's not that he's done anything wrong. He was a fantastic boyfriend. He's a great guy. Like, I loved him. Like, he was awesome.
Yeah, it's just if it's not the right fit, it's not.
And I told him, and he was so understanding. He's like, no, like, I want you to go find your person, and I want you to have the person that's meant for you. If it's not us, that's okay. Like, that's great. And he was so respectful and so understanding, and just like, I commend him because he just genuinely has such a pure heart, and like, he's a great person. It just wasn't the right person for me. And like, I have no hard feelings towards him. But yeah, everybody that wanted to know what happened, that's what happened.
Well, you guys will both find someone great. It'll all work out in the end. But I feel like that is one of the superpowers of getting a divorce is like, you don't waste your time. Absolutely. Like, you're not reckless with people's hearts. You don't waste your time. It's like, I think we are very intentional about whatever we do after, because it's like, oh, well, but I think also obviously allowing ourselves space to like mess up and learn, because it's obviously tricky to navigate and stuff. And so now I want to kind of lean into a little bit of a segment about like just some advice that maybe we can give to people that are going through divorce, that feel shame, that feel isolated, that feel like maybe there's no hope for them, because I know we've both felt like that, and it's felt like the end of the world. But I feel like divorce, it's so crazy, and I really hope anyone who's listening really hears me when I say this. It feels like the end of your life, but it's literally just the beginning. Like, it's the start of something so good. Like, it feels like you're losing everything, but like, in hindsight now, I've been divorced for, I don't even know how long, 5.5 years.
The timeline's hard.
I know. I'm like, it's all foggy. I've been divorced for a really long time, and it's like, it's crazy how God is so faithful. Like, God has given me everything that I've lost times a billion. And I think it's so funny, because I think first love, it's like, we accept whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, oh my gosh, this person is so right for me, and we're so compatible. And now, like, having my current boyfriend David, I'm like, we were literally not compatible. like we were, but like me and David, I'm like, he is my best friend. He's literally my best friend. Like, I can sit in a room with David from the day that I've met him and feel comfortable with him, and just I feel like I can be myself. I don't feel like I have to change who I am to appease him. I don't feel like I have to dim down my personality or what I love to. Kind of like you said, like, your ex wasn't supportive of social media. Like, I felt similar, where I just felt like I had to like be what that person wanted, and like and I just, and that's not healthy. Like, And so with David, it's just like, he just loves me and accepts me for who I am. And he's just like my bud, like love him to death, you know, like, and so it's just funny, but it's like when I went through it, I was like, I'm never going to find love again. And I don't want to find love again. Screw men. Like I'm never dating again. I want to be single forever. I'm content. And like now looking back, I'm like, wow, I'm so grateful. Not only that I went through that because I have everything I have now, but because I know that I wouldn't appreciate or be who I am today if I didn't go through that.
So true.
You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, just like what advice do we have for all the people?
Yeah, I mean, number one, my biggest thing is like find community somehow. You know, no matter what that looks like, even if it's just a counselor, like somebody that can see you for where you're at and be there for you. Finding a small group if you can, or any type of support group to help you feel less alone is so powerful, and having those people in your life. And then just being part of something bigger than yourself. Like having faith or just community or being involved in something like giving back. That was so helpful for me, you know. And the other thing that you said is that it feels like your life is ending, but I'm so grateful for everything that happened to me now, because I feel like I've gotten my life back. You know, I feel like I lost so much of myself during those like 2 years that I was in that relationship. Well, like five years, but like the 2 years I was married. But I just feel like I had lost so much of myself. And then once I was out of that relationship that really wasn't, you know, pushing me towards a lifestyle that I was meant to live, you know, I just feel like I gained so much back in my life. And I feel like that is when my life actually started. And so 100%. Like, it's just, I don't want people to feel like their life's ending, because it's not. You know, it's a start of a new chapter, and it's rough, and it is hard to jump and start a whole different version of your life. But like, there's so much beauty that comes from like the most painful parts, and like pain plus self-reflection is growth. And growth is never a fun process. It's always painful.
It's not. And like, I think even if, and I would assume you could agree with me on this, even if I had nothing today, I, you know, was still single and had been divorced for years, and, you know, whatever it is, like now looking back, at the time I didn't think this, but having nothing is so much better than having something that isn't serving you and that's hurting you. And having no one in your life, or you know, having a lack of a partner is better than having one that's not treating you well, or whatever it is. Like, I think we hold on to things because we're like, I don't want to be alone, I don't want to lose something, but it's like, it's better to have nothing than to have something that's wrong. And that's bad, you know. It's better to literally have nothing, you know what I mean?
And I think that's the point that I got to after during my divorce too. It's like, I could lose everything. Like, this could get really ugly, and it did. But I got to the point where I was like, I would rather be left with nothing and have to go live on someone's couch and, you know, lose everything that I had. Because I had like a very good business at the time, and everything we had was conjoined. And I was like, I would risk everything that I have and start over from ground zero and lose everything, and have to find a way to like become like almost a teenager again and re-find a career and all these things. I was like, I would rather that than to be in a relationship that is harming me the way that this one is. And I think you get to that point, and it allows you to like free yourself in a sense that like, if you're okay and you realize that like you're okay with starting over, like anything that you know survive with after that is a bonus. And it was such a beautiful process, and like thankfully God protected me in so many ways. But like, your life's not over. Long story
your life
short.
isn't over.
Your life is just starting.
It's not. It literally feels like your life is ending when you get a divorce, and there's so much shame and guilt and fear, and there's so much unknown, you know. And I think especially growing up in the church, whether it's whatever religion it is, there's so much identity we put in marriage, and like there's so much worth and value in like being married. And I think marriage is a beautiful thing, but it's like, your life matters outside of that, and like your life is it's gonna have so much healing and goodness. Like after divorce, it feels like it's not, but it really will. And like, I just want to encourage anyone, kind of like Karissa had talked about with like healing in the process. Like healing isn't linear, and I know people always say that. It's like so cliche to say that, but when you are going through a divorce, you will experience so many different emotions all the time, and you are still healing. Even if it feels like you've taken steps back, you're actually taking steps forward, because sometimes we really have to like feel that emotion or experience that trigger or whatever it is to actually like be able to heal from it. And it takes time. It's like not gonna happen overnight, and it's also not, it's complicated, you know. So if you even have friends going through divorce, it's like, it's not just as simple as, oh, it's been 6 months, oh, it's been 2 years, oh, it's been whatever. It's like healing is a very complicated, long process, but that doesn't mean that you're not healing. You are.
Absolutely.
It's happening even when it doesn't feel like it, you know.
And God has your back.
Yeah, you know? God has you exactly where he where he needs you. And I feel like that's a thing that's so interesting about God, is like he wants you to work through stuff. Like he doesn't want to just like, it's like, God, just heal me, take it away.
Doesn't work like that, unfortunately.
It's like, unfortunately it doesn't, but it's good. I think it's because God knows us, and he knows how curious we are. He knows how our brains work, and that if God were to just turn around and heal us, it's like we would never have to go through that emotion or work through that experience or that trauma to actually have genuine healing. It's like if someone just takes it away, it's like, is there real healing there? You know what I mean? It's like we have to let it happen. And even like post-divorce, which I know we talked about a little bit in dating, there's a lot of healing, I think, that happens in your first couple relationships after divorce. Like I feel like I had gotten to like a good healing place. I was like, I feel like I'm pretty much healed. You know what I mean? Like
you think
like I'm like doing good, and I was doing really good individually. I feel like in my therapy journey, I was like at a place where I loved myself. I had good identity. I was independent. I had peace, acceptance, all these things. But when I started dating David, I was like, oh, I have a lot of relationship stuff I have to heal through. And they always say like the first healthy relationship after the toxic one is rough.
No kidding.
It's really rough. And it was a whole process, but it does get better.
Yeah.
It really does.
Absolutely.
Like it's not the end of the world. And even your relationship, your trust issues, all those things, like they get better.
Yeah.
I know you have
That's
those.
good to know.
It does it?
That's good.
No, it really does. Like when even just between me and you, obviously it's filming, but like when me and David first started dating, it was rough for me. It was super rough. I put so much on him, like so much pressure, and like my standards were like here, because I was like,
you're trying to protect yourself.
I'm like, I will never tolerate like anything, you know. And then obviously we went through things, and it was hard. And poor guy just had to deal with a lot of my trauma. You know what I mean? Like a lot of things that happened to me in my marriage, you know, I was putting on him for such small situations. And it's like, it wasn't about him. It was about what had happened to me and me trying to protect myself. But like it does get so much better. But I think there is definitely a lot of trust issues that we all naturally have after our whole life is turned upside down in marriage, you know.
Well, you're like in protection mode.
And when you've been betrayed, you're like, oh, like it's gonna happen again. Like if you can be betrayed by someone who literally committed spending life with you, when you're dating someone, you're like, you could easily do the same thing.
That's the hard thing. It's like, I think, oh my gosh, I don't trust any man. Which is so bad.
No. Like, this is literally exactly where I was at. A year and a half after my divorce is when me and David started dating. And before we started dating, I was like, I'm not dating anyone. And then obviously it happened. But like, I was like, it took so long for me to trust him. And it was bad.
That's what I always say too. I'm like, for me to get married again, it would take like so much trust being built with somebody. But it's, I think in a way that's also good, because it's like a precaution.
100%. You do things differently. Like it's, I think getting married quick is, I think you can be successful, but like, I just think it takes time to really see someone's true character and like seeing how they deal with conflict and how you guys work through issues. And like, you know, no one's going to be perfect, but any successful relationship takes two people that really desire for it to work and also like won't give up on each other. obviously with boundary lines, you have to give up on each other if it's toxic. But you know what I mean? It's like two people that are willing to do the hard work that it takes to have a good relationship. And it's gonna like ebb and flow. But I was in that place, so I get it. And it's hard to trust men.
Yeah. It's a process.
Exactly. That's the whole point, is that it's a process. Divorce is a process. But you're doing amazing.
Thank you.
You're doing so good. And I'm so glad we were able to talk about all these things today. And yeah, I just want to encourage anyone watching this who is maybe going through divorce, who is maybe married and, you know, starting to have issues, or is facing separation or whatever it is, or even people who are post-divorce. Anyone who feels like, am I alone? Am I normal? Like, is this okay that I'm going through this? Anyone who just feels like they're just falling apart, you know, falling to shreds, like, it like, this was a fun conversation. We joked and we talked, and obviously in hindsight, when we talk about things, we're not able to really like actually relive the trauma and the intensity of the situation. But I know for me and you both, our divorces were the most life-shattering thing that we ever went through. And it wasn't just in the moment, it was through the process. And I think there's ways that we will still go through it, you know, forever. And so, yeah, I just want to encourage anyone that's going through any of that you're not alone, that you're seen, that you're heard, that you're normal, that you should have no guilt and shame around your divorce. There's nothing wrong with being divorced, and you're not used goods, you're not damaged goods, and there's hope for you. There's healing for you. There's so much like beauty on the other side. It just takes time.
And it's a superpower in a way.
It's kind of a superpower.
It's kind of great.
Divorce girlies. It's so funny. I tell all my friends, like, we were talking about this yesterday. Like when they're like looking for like a wife, they're like, oh, Nicole, set me up with your friends. I'm like, you should date someone divorced. They're like, no, why? I'm like, no, trust me.
Trust us.
I'm like, listen, they're like, but why? I'm like, listen, the trauma, it makes us better wives and better people and easier to date, because I feel like when you get divorced, you appreciate good people more, like good men. Yeah, you know,
absolutely.
But there's a self-awareness. There's a lot that goes into it.
You have to be to survive a divorce. You become self-aware.
Yeah. So, if you want dating advice, date a divorced girl. Make sure they're not, I mean, okay, I know it's hard because I feel like one of the hard things about dating divorced people is it's like there's always the assumption. Even David said that, like when he met me, he's like, well, were you the problem in the marriage? You know what I mean?
I get that a lot. They're like, who did it?
Yeah, they're like, well, and obviously it's so complicated. But yeah, I mean, check your facts, people. But yeah, divorced girls are great, specifically ones that were really traumatized by it.
Yes, I would have to agree.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was so fun. Thank you for opening up, sharing a little bit of your heart and your story. And I know that so many people are going to watch and just feel understood by you and feel connected to you. And so for that, guys, please go follow Karissa on all of her social media platforms to support her and what she's doing. It's just Karissa. Is it Karissa.Wampler?
Yeah.
Okay, I knew it. I literally knew it.
On TikTok, it's k.wamp.
Okay. K.wamp. Okay, so TikTok is k.wamp, and then
Instagram,
Karissa.
Just Karissa Wampler.
Got it. Okay, and obviously I'll link all your stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, if you guys want to go support her and follow along on her journey, go and do it. She's amazing. I love her. Any boys watching this who are single, that are self-aware, smart, kind, compassionate,
or divorced,
or divorced. Here's your girl.
You never know.
She's single. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm so thankful for you guys, and I'm so thankful for you. And I will talk to you guys in 2 weeks.
Thanks for having me.
Yay.